You are listening to Cemetary Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
We are reviewing the newest album from the Cemetary Girlz, which is in French. I don't know if you want to take a shot at pronouncing that, Trey, because I certainly am not.
I'll go with L'Envol du corbeau. I think it means the flight of ravens or the flight of crows or something like that.
Okay, that makes sense. So the little blurb on the Bandcamp page is as follows. This is the day these 6 songs are no longer ours and they become a part of you. We hope they inspire you as you wander this strange, cold world. We're forever grateful for your support for keeping us and our music alive. Listen, feel, dance, and cry. Sing with the echoes of our love, our pain, our hopes and despair. Fall and rise till the last kiss forces us to part. You now have the key to the garden of faded roses. Let the eternal night begin with our new album. So let's play a track off the album. I was thinking Eternal Night. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, I can go with that one. That was the very Christian Death one.
Yes, it was. Yeah. So I'm not super familiar with the Cemetary Girlz. I know that I like the band. I know they are explicitly goth and embrace the cheese and humor that comes with that. For example, on the Bandcamp page, they call their fans bats and crows. I follow them on Facebook, and they post sort of self-referential jokes about goth that are fun. And the members' names, some of the members' names are Alien, S Pagan, and Susie Side. So they embrace and joke about their cliches, which I love. I haven't listened to them.
It's actually Suicide.
Suicide? Okay.
Like suicide, but with Susie Sue's spelling, the Sue part.
I haven't listened to them in a long time, so I came into this with the idea that it would be a death rock album, and it was, but it is also a lot more than that. So I'm going to go through maybe not every track, but some tracks to give an idea. So the album opens with The Wanderer, which is really bass guitar forward, and that automatically gives it a post-punk feel. It's also fairly slow in tempo, which creates a mournful gothic atmosphere up until like about halfway through, when the guitar really kicks in and brings more of a goth rock feel to the track. And I think it's an example of what they do throughout the album, which is build complexity into the music. Track 2, Echoes of My Tears, continues that kind of spooky infusion, which continues through most of the album, this sort of like heavily atmospheric style of music. So that song starts with this short synth, which gives me the vibe of like a soundtrack to a late foggy night in the cemetery. And then it bursts into more of a classical death rock sound, which I pegged as kind of a blend between Alter de Fe and Christian Death. The track is still fairly slow in tempo, kind of plodding in a way, but I think that adds a weight to the track that I like. And the vocals on this track and the next one are undeniably reminiscent of Roz.
Yes, very much.
And but you know, I like the tempo changes throughout the song in non-trivial ways that kind of evoke different emotions. So again, it's sort of, to me at least, this sort of layering of complexity, where you get like one section that slows way down and incorporates that haunting atmosphere, and then it all speeds up as this death choir crescendos into something else. And it's undeniably death rock, but it also incorporates some metal elements as well. Some parts of it kind of reminded me a bit of like Cradle of Filth, which I think works really well and makes the track more interesting and less predictable. And then Eternal Night is the track we just played. I think it would fit very much into like Catastrophe Ballet, for example. It's death rock, but it's not the punk rock death rock or the carnivalesque death rock. It's that artsy, atmospheric death rock. And I think this is one of the best iterations of that I've heard in recent years. I do think people are going to be split on the vocals because, again, it is very Roz sounding, and some people are going to say, well, that's been done before. Well, how dare you? But I, you know, first of all, most vocalists at least take inspiration from the sort of archetypes that were set before them. And I don't think that's inherently bad. It's kind of down to personal taste and context, I think. And for me, this really works. It's not just a copycat of Roz either, because, for example, they use later on in this track, they use this unsettling vocal effect that produces a kind of, I don't know, hellish layered sound over the voice. And then there's also some screaming, like almost black metal style vocals at the end as it ramps up. And I think that really elevates the song. From there, though, the album switches again, as if to say, haha, you thought this was a death rock album, but you've underestimated us. So there are 2 back-to-back 8-minute tracks, and they're kind of, at least to me, kind of like rock ballads in a way. There's not as much distorted guitar. There's a kind of romantic element. For example, one of the tracks has these beautiful violins and string instruments. There's an ethereal element as well, sort of like a Lycia aspect. But they also bring in some, I think what I would call doom metal elements, like towards the end of the second half of this song.
The title track?
Yeah. There's the rhythmic drums that to me sounds emblematic of metal, and this slow doom metal vocals are there as well. The only thing missing is like a chugging guitar, but I think the string instruments kind of fill that role in a clever and beautiful way. And then they close the album with another not death rock song, and it's probably my least favorite simply because it's a more straightforward kind of alt rock, post-punk kind of track. The vocals are farther back in the mix and kind of echoey. The synth is generally simple and sharp, and most of the song is almost kind of sounds like a jam session to me. It is slow and atmospheric, which I do like, though. So overall, I found this to be an amazing album. I really loved it. I don't think any of these tracks are club floor tracks necessarily. I guess it might depend on the night, but it's to me, this is on the spectrum. If you have like straightforward death rock on one end, and then somebody like Lingua Ignota or somebody on the other end, it's more towards the side of a contemplative, more work to digest album, and with fewer of the more consumable like pop sensibilities. Yeah, on the complex side, it's I think it's creative, it's engaging in a substantive way. It's suffused with the essence of a graveyard at night, which is perfect for the persona of the band. Throughout the album, I felt like I could feel the squishy moss covered graves under my feet and smell the rotting leaves. And it really does, for me, harken back to that art rock ethos of artists like Christian Death, which I do love. So as far as a rating would go, I would give this a 4.5 out of 5.
Very nice. Very nice. So yeah, I'll kind of go track by track as well. I have most of them. I didn't have a lot of opinions on the last track, kind of like you. It just sort of fell by the wayside. The second to last track was very intense and kind of overshadowed the last track, which did feel like a little bit of a throwaway. But yeah, it started with the first track, The Wanderer. I agree with you. I think that one was probably one of their more goth rock forward tracks rather than goth rock / post punk, because like you mentioned, the very bass forward. I thought the bass line was really good. I really enjoyed the bass tone on that. One thing I did enjoy, since we were talking about the vocals and how the lead singer, I believe Alien is the lead singer, how they were certainly evoking Roz and some of the other tracks. But one of the things I liked about The Wanderer is that they had a lot of different vocal characters. Because it was clearly very multi-tracked, because there was a lot of interplay between various vocal lines that were coming in and out with different vocal styles between, I mean, the one in the front, making it more of a goth rock type thing, was sort of your goth baritone. You're not quite Sisters of Mercy, but in that vein. You had that standard goth baritone, but there was a lot of then, answering whispery vocals and other weird, creepy affectations of vocals. Mm-hmm. So it was a real interesting blend of vocal styles and vocal techniques and timbres that was just blended in with a very nice, solid, early goth rock, late post-punk sound with that heavy bass forward sound and all that. The drumming was really nice as well. It really supported the whole track really well, and was a nice foundation upon to build a track. So that was a really good track that I quite enjoyed. The second track, Echoes of My Tears, that is the first one, as you mentioned, where the how I put it, I said definitely channeling Roz Williams in this one. I got that almost immediately, especially given the title Echoes of My Tears. Every time he said tears, it sounded just like Luxury of Tears. Had the same tears that Roz tends to do, that sort of falling off vocal timbre where it sort of hits a pitch and has a melody, but it kind of bends and falls off of it at the end and kind of goes into a creaky fry singing style as well, rather than being pure pitches. And Alien really did a great job of evoking Roz there. And while I frequently complain about that, in this instance, because it wasn't the whole album with every track being the same voice, I don't mind when people borrow from other voices. I just don't want it to be their entire vocal style is just aping some other band, because that's where my complaints about, well, I've heard it before and it's the same thing, and why not just listen to the original comes in. That's when the whole album is like that. Or to some degree, if it's one track, if the entire track just sounds like it could have easily been off of that other band's album, it's like, did you really add something? But in this case, there was a lot going on with this track above and beyond just the channeling of Roz Williams in the vocals. So this track, well, okay, we'll start with the intro. I loved the intro. I think that's a pretty common thing for me in a lot of these album reviews, though I tend to really love intros because I like weird abstract music, and that's what people like to throw on intros, is those weird ambiances with instruments coming in, playing intricate little lines before the whole band piles on and it becomes sort of a standard song structure. I think a lot of bands view the intros, and to a lesser degree outros, as a chance they can kind of stretch their creative muscles and be a little weird for a while before they have to kind of rein it in to get the people who want, more standard musical structures to take the fore. So I did enjoy that. Had some great spooky atmospheres in the background, and a nice little guitar arpeggiation with a real nice chiming tone that I quite enjoyed. It was a little shorter than I wish it was, but it was still really enjoyable. And then when the band came in, it was also very good. However, this also brought in the biggest one of my major complaints on this. And I think to a degree, this might be some other metal influence. On some of these tracks, the drummer got a bit out of control. The drumming on some of these tracks, and this would be the first one that I noticed it on, was so busy it became distracting. There are even points where there would be like complicated drum fills on top of the singer. I'm like, I'm trying to listen to the vocals, and now you're doing this complicated drum, fill with a bunch of toms and snare rolls and stuff like that. I'm like, but wait till the singer's done. And do it, it gets to an interlude. The singer finishes their line, their verse, and you've got this dead space, and that's where you can put a quick fill. So there was a little bit on this track where the drummer felt like they were almost showboating, and I felt it kind of it detracted from the rest of the track.
See, I'm a drummer, so I was like, "Get it, girl." I didn't really necessarily notice that because I liked it, but yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean,
I'm really drum and rhythmically focused as well, but I like it when it's blended better.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily matter because I'm all about showboating, and I love listening to. I mean, give me a 10-minute Neopert drum solo any day, but that's when you're listening for a drum solo, not you're listening to a whole song, and all of a sudden the singer's finishing off their line, and there's a happening all over the place. I'm like, let the singer finish, then you can have your moment to shine. It was like they were fighting for dominance, and that just kind of took me out of the mood a little bit.
Yeah.
So that was my main complaint there. Eternal Night, third track. This was a flat, straight out Christian death track. Like, you kind of mentioned this sounded very much Christian death, not just with the singing, but with the instrumental kind of, I want to say late era Roz Christian death with Eva O, because it almost felt like she was in there, even though there wasn't really a secondary singer. There's just some of the ways that Alien was singing that kind of felt almost like he was shifting between Roz and Eva, which was pretty interesting. And then the instrumentals had, I love the organ on this track. It had a great organ line happening throughout that added a lot of great ambiance. The drums were actually, the drums were good in this one. Not again, I guess this is back to like the first track where the drums felt like they were kind of staying in their lane a little bit more. They still were pretty good. I think the drummer is very accomplished at drumming. But they were supporting the rest of the track and thus enhancing the whole thing rather than kind of co-opting it, like I almost felt the second track was kind of falling into. So I did enjoy that track, but then of course when it comes to death rock, which I've expressed a dislike, well, not a dislike for, I don't necessarily, it's not my favorite of the goth subgenres, but I do love my Christian death. So the fact that the death rock they were channeling the most in this was Christian death, I loved it. So I did enjoy that track. Track 4, Faded Roses, probably my favorite track on the album. I loved it. It was a great atmospheric track, while still being straightforward. It didn't go full into the atmospherics. It had a lot of that sort of goth rock thing. It had some of the death rock in it as well. It was a good amalgamation of all of the sounds that they've been kind of evoking throughout this album. I loved the intro. It was great, a great sort of mix of field recording and Foley happening with the ambient air and the nature sounds and the crows, along with another really nice guitar line with some chiming guitar arpeggios and some basic plucked lines rather than strumming. And in this case, I loved the drumming. Some amazing use of cymbals, very delicate but very sharp. You could definitely hear all the elements were very crisp and clear, and you were really getting all of the elements of all the band members coming through. And they were really just put all together into this whole that was greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
So I did really love that. Like I said, once it got into the flow of things in the music, it was evoking more of that goth rock style, even more towards the goth rock than the post-punk of the first track. This was, in my opinion, probably the most goth rock of the album. And I really did enjoy that. There was, and again, the vocalist mixed it up some more, just like on the first track. They had some Roz Williams in there, but the Roz Williams part was actually more of one of the background vocals. The foreground was bringing into that baritone voice a little bit more. There was a lot of great whispery tones, some real close mic singing that was really nice as well. That was really drawing you into the track and making you want to listen really closely. There was just a lot of precision, delicate pieces. It was like a piece of beautiful clockwork that was really fascinating to just dive into. And I really enjoyed that. It was a longer track. I did feel there were a couple points where it probably could have ended and chose not to. I think it kind of dragged a little bit. And then there was a bit on the second half where the drums started to creep up a little bit more than I wanted them to, but it wasn't that bad. Just a little bit more of the drums started going with a very heavy, not quite blast beaty, but getting there a little bit as the drum intensity went up, but the rest of the music didn't seem to follow with it. And that felt a little bit disjointed, but that was just for like a minute or a minute and a half towards the end. And then it backed off again and went into a recapitulation of the intro, where it brought back the ambiance, brought back the Foley sounds, and had a nice sort of, gentle guitar line to take us out of the track, which was really nice. I just wish there wasn't a big chunk of dead air at the end of the track. Gave me bad flashbacks of all those hidden tracks at the end of 90s records.
Yeah.
I'm like, is it going to be another? Is this the end of the album, or is there another track? I was trying to remember, was this a 5-track album or a 6-track album? Do I have to start it over? Oh, nope. Their track 6 or their track 5 just started.
Grab my CD player and try and fast forward to see if I hear anything.
Right, exactly. So there's a little bit of dead air at the end that was a little annoying, but that's a cutting issue. Then there was track 5, which was the most sort of ethereal, atmospheric. It wasn't an instrumental track, but it felt like an instrumental track. When all of the musical components, including the vocals, came in, they became sort of a one piece of a sonic texture. This was the one that I really couldn't make out the vocals that much, though I didn't really try, and I didn't like pull up the lyrics because that sometimes helps when the vocals are buried. If you have the lyrics to read, you can make it out a little bit better. Yeah. The first time I listened to this track, I had a little bit of problems with it. I liked the feeling of the atmosphere, but I was struggling because everything was so mishmashed together, and I was having trouble sort of pulling them apart to enjoy particular instrumental phrases. But on a couple of listens, I just sort of let go of that that want to pull it apart and sort of analyze it and just let it wash over me. And I enjoyed it a lot more in that sense. It had a lot of that sort of a, not quite a dream pop, not quite a dark ambient, not quite even a sound collage type thing, but sort of a little bit of all of that mixed together.
Yeah.
In just sort of a wave of sonic texture, which I did enjoy. It wasn't my favorite track as much as I do like all those constituent genres, and I've been getting into dark ambient a lot more lately too. But I did really enjoy this track. It was a little bit of a left turn that kind of lost me a little bit. But overall, I liked it, and I think if I just put it on alone, I would enjoy it a lot more rather than coming at it after listening to the rest of the album, because it was such a significant left turn.
Yeah.
But overall, I did enjoy the track. It was good. And then, like I said earlier, the 6th track, I didn't get to do a final listen to it before we started this recording. So that's when I took all my notes. I listened through the whole album several times on my commute over the last month or so, and then also at home some. But I didn't get that last listen because I didn't give myself enough time this afternoon before starting the podcast to write down notes. But it didn't really stick with me. But it wasn't. That's neither a good or a bad thing, because sometimes tracks I really don't like stick with me a lot too, and I definitely remember being unhappy about certain tracks. But overall, no, that one didn't bother me. So overall on the album, I also really very much enjoyed it. I'm going to have to go with somewhere between maybe a 4.25, somewhere between 4 and 4.5. I can't quite give a 4.5. The drumming aspects when it was doing that thing that I already complained about did really bring me out of it. And I thought that was distracting. That was probably the main issue I had with it. As much as impressive as the drumming was, and the drumming was excellent, I don't have any complaints about the quality of the drumming. I had some issues with the arrangement of the individual songs that it was a part of. I felt it wasn't balanced. It didn't really fit necessarily. And it stuck out too much, and it took me out of the mood that I felt the track was evoking. And that could just be my opinion. In fact, it absolutely is.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, overall,
Awesome.
somewhere between 4 and 4.5, but definitely recommended. It was a really good album.
Lovely, lovely, lovely.
So you've got to be interested in death. It's the last great taboo. It's the only taboo left.
Precisely. I mean, why is it, do you think, that everyone in here is dressed in black? It's a celebration of death.
No, I just like the clothes.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, the clothes look good. Yeah, I mean, death looks good. Charles Manson, yeah? No, he was cool.
Don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'm actually a vampire.
Sinister Suggestions.
I'm reading a really interesting book right now. It is, I mean, I guess we'll make it a Sinister Suggestion. I'm not really all the way through it. It's called Our Band Could Be Your Life.
Okay.
And it's sort of a history/anecdotal story about the rise of indie rock from 81 to 91. So the 80s post-punk indie rock that led to the alternative grunge revival in the 90s. So one of the things that the first several bands that they were bringing up, because they started each chapter is a band. So it started with Black Flag. Then they had, I think, the Minutemen was in there. They had Husker Du. Just Sonic Youth was the last track. I'm doing the Butthole Surfers right now. But the first several albums with Black Flag and the Minutemen were kind of talking about the rise of hardcore. So that's what that started with. As the funny thing is, they were kind of portraying hardcore as why I kind of called it post-punk was kind of if post-punk is a reaction to punk, hardcore was kind of a reaction to post-punk to a degree.
Right.
Where they thought post-punk was taking some of the sort of, I mean, when you're dealing with punk, you're dealing with weird toxic masculinity sometimes, but there's an aspect where they thought that post-punk was taking punk and making it a little too wimpy sometimes, especially when they got into post-punk as it was splintering off into some of its subgenres, specifically new wave, especially with the British influx of new waves and your Flock of Seagulls and some of the very popular stuff, where hardcore was definitely a reaction against anything that was very poppy, while still being more experimental to a degree than core punk, where they're willing to throw in more of that sort of weird soundy stuff that post-punk was bringing in, but bringing back some of that aggression and more of the lo-fi DIY stuff and less of the art school pretenses that kind of coalesced around post-punk and some of their more arty Fluxus movement Dadaist, in some people's minds overeducated, art school major aspects of it from both the British and especially the New York scene in the US. So there was some of that pushback there. But overall, I mean, these aren't genres that I'm necessarily a huge fan of. I'm not really a hardcore person as much as I can claim to be straight edge. Has nothing to do with the Minutemen and their, to some degree, invention of that subculture of the punk community.
Right.
But it was really fascinating to hear the stories of these bands and to kind of get the tales. And they had a lot of, each chapter is read by a different person. I haven't really looked into it to see if the person who's doing the chapter was also involved in they're not like a member of the band as far as I know. But whether they were involved with that band's rise or with that particular part, I'm not really sure. I haven't looked into, but they definitely keep changing readers in the audiobook, because I'm doing the audiobook as I usually do with each one. So I've been creating a playlist in YouTube Music to keep it separate from my Spotify playlist, which is its own messy nightmare. That is just for this book. So as I go down an artist, I'll kind of create a playlist of some of their top albums just to kind of listen through them and give them a fair shot. Because like I said, I've not really gravitated towards this music, with the exception of like Sonic Youth. I'm a fan of, and I am a fan of the one Butthole Surfers song that I and pretty much anybody else who's not really a fan of the Butthole Surfers but has heard them, Pepper. That's the only Butthole Surfers song I know.
I'd have to listen to it. I probably do. I don't recognize the title.
Yeah, it's I don't mind the sun sometimes, the image.
Oh, yeah, I do. Yes. Yep.
I can taste you on my lips and smell you in my clothes. That's Pepper by Butthole Surfers.
Okay.
Which it got a lot of airplay in the 90s.
Yeah.
And it's probably the only Butthole Surfers song they got much, because they are as their name would imply, kind of scatological band, and they definitely had a very juvenile sense of humor, as they were more than happy to express so far in their chapter too. A lot of that sort of, when you talk about some of the wild and crazy shows, your Gigi Allens and your Throbbing Gristles, a lot of bodily excretions being sprayed about, and sexual and perverse things happening on stage, and people running around naked with diapers and stuff like that. So there's plenty of that, and they also had a big video show, and they tended to put on a big show, and that was their shtick. But overall, I think it's a really good book. It's giving a good slice of life of a part of the 80s that I'm not as intimately familiar with, and I'm quite enjoying, especially as I've, comparing it with something like Rip It Up and Start Again as a tale of the post-punk revolution from the late 70s to the early 80s. This is the 81 to 91. And like I said, it almost feels like a reaction, a post-punk reaction, which is really interesting. So there you go.
Absolutely love it. I would say I will put it on my reading list, but my reading list is very long.
You'll put it on there. You may get to it.
Yeah.
It might be a couple of lives in the future.
Oh my God. I just saw the new Frozen Autumn album is out now. Today, I think.
I would be amiss to not make a sinister suggestion to the new Bellwether Syndicate album too.
Yes.
I
haven't had a chance to listen to it yet.
I've listened to singles. I haven't listened to the whole album yet, but I've been listening to the singles and, really enjoying them. And of course, hearing them played at Nocturna. And then I also saw them play with Clan of Zymox.
Yeah.
So all that. But yeah, their album came out. Definitely recommend it. The singles I've heard have been great. The tracks I've heard at clubs have been great. I'm sure the album itself will be great, but I'll have to give it a full listen to get a good take on it and a good review.
I was just listening to the new Belgrado album today that just came out as well. Also fucking slaps. But yeah, I gotta sit down and listen to all these albums. But yeah, obviously Bellwether Syndicate, friends of ours, fantastic people, and they make kick-ass music. I did review the previous single on, I don't remember which episode it was, a couple episodes ago, but yeah, really excited to dig into the new album. And with that, let's get into my sinister suggestions. It's me again, from the future. Well, from my future, and from your past. But I've had time to listen to the new Bellwether Syndicate since we last spoke. And it's no surprise that an album from William and Sarah, two individuals who are intimately familiar with the landscape of post-punk and goth rock, would create an innovative and refreshing take on the genre we love. The beauty of this album is its incorporation of sensibilities from adjacent rock genres, with influences from death rock and goth rock and post-punk, which combined create an album that feels like it moves the needle of goth rock as a genre forward. The guitar is gritty and unrelenting, the bass is under your skin and drives the band. The percussion plays a support role for the most part, but it's varied and engaging in its own way, and the synth is well balanced to fill in the cracks of the brick wall we're building and really put the cherry on top of the album. Vocally, these are my favorite performances out of William and Sarah yet. William especially plays with the vocals in an incredibly satisfying way, and Sarah brings a stunning shoegaze and ethereal performance to the album. Clarion, for example, was one of my favorite tracks, and I'd love to hear more of that. They aren't afraid to rip up the formula either, with tracks like Republic that are funk and swing at the same time. It's one of my favorite goth rock albums of the last few years. It's complex and varied in its diversity, but incredibly catchy and memorable from the very first listen. It's leftist, it's hard-hitting. Absolutely make sure you don't miss this one. Next up, we have the new album Grimoire from Shrouds, kind of continuing the death rock from our album review. Shrouds is out of California, and before I talk about the album, I should mention that this record was released on Batcave Productions out of Poland. In our Witch Hands interview on Patreon, Ryan talked really fondly of Batcave Productions, and I don't think I've mentioned them on the show before, so I would hope they're kind of a known entity, but if you haven't ever checked out the label, do so immediately, because it's an incredible collection of musicians that you should be listening to, and they do some great physical media releases as well, and a festival also, which is fantastic. Anyway, this new album is a fucking jam. Bold, heavy bass guitar that kicks you right in the ass and can be funky as well at times. Vocals that are reminiscent of that Bowie death rock sound, mixed with an aggressive punk rock vocal as well. The album is pretty fast-paced with a kind of dirty hard rock sensibility, but there's some surf rock and kind of like swing elements to some of the tracks as well, which I always appreciate. It's an 8-track album, though all but a few tracks are under 3 minutes, so it really just flies by, and the intensity and passion of the music add to the punchiness of the album. Also out of California is the Wraith, who just released their new single, Overthrown. The new vocalist does a great job with a deep, almost Elvis-like kind of delivery that's reminiscent of the 69 Eyes, for example. And musically as well, it's very much on the rock and roll side of the spectrum rather than death rock. It's a track that would almost fit in with like Goth Minister or Gothzilla, or even a band like Grooving in Green or Calabrese. But you get a quick-tempoed, aggressive 80s leather rock sound that's in your face. It's a fun track, and I'm certainly interested to hear what they do next. Haunt Me is out of Austin, Texas, and they just released their new single, Heads Will Roll. This is a band that I am often playing in my car. So there's the single version, and then there's a remix by another Texas band, Nite, N-I-T-E. And I have to say I prefer the remix because it's just a great dance floor track. You can't listen to it and not dance. It's bass heavy with those reverbed post-punk guitars that make goths go crazy. And there's a semi-industrial sounding synth that shows up in the track. It's right in the sort of rendezvous vein of dancey post-punk. The original single version is good as well. It's sort of a Depeche Mode meets Darkwave song, so it's a good melodic, swirly track with a solid percussive beat as a backbone. Definitely worth a listen, and the band should be checked out as well if you haven't before. Next up is the Frozen Autumn, who are one of my favorite bands, and they're back and better than ever with the new album, The Shape of Things to Come. The album starts off with a dance floor banger. It's undeniably a Frozen Autumn melody and one of the best tracks they've ever made. The album features their signature 80s charm, full of bright, sparkly synth and soaring melodies. The synths are what you would expect out of this band. A recognizable, sharp, and spacious sound that leaves room between instruments to kind of echo through your head. It's not stacked on top of each other. It's not overly dense. The vocals are as haunting and melodic as always. It's uniquely Frozen Autumn, and they don't really sound like anyone else. So if you love the band or want something different, this album is definitely where it's at. Next up is another California band. How fucking weird is that? Well, this single is from Fevr, which comes less than a month after their newest LP was released. This specific track, Sight, is very laid back, stripped back, hollow sounding post-punk. And I mean that in a good way. The track is evoking a sense of longing, of nostalgia, of yearning, and it does it well. All the melodies are minimal here, even compared to the previous album, which is, I would say, more robust in its sound. So I'd say with this song, they kind of take their time, like a slow, lonely walk on a summer's night, which I have many of. The album is similarly romantic, with a good variety of genre curiosity. So if you enjoy this track and want a similar vibe that's played with in fresh ways, I definitely recommend the album as well. From Germany comes the newest single from the band, Mantarochen, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing. The track name Glaza is also in Russian, so I apologize to everyone listening to this. It's very much a Russian post-punk track to my ears. You've got the tinny drum machine, the loud bass guitar, and the jangly guitars. I think they do some interesting tricks with the guitar riffs that put a new spin on the genre, which I like. There's a distant, reverbed, feminine vocal as well that has this classic, almost bored or depressed sounding delivery that I really enjoy. Next up is the new album from Greece's Grey Gallows. It releases in May, but they've put out 3 singles off of the album. The 3 tracks are going to be familiar to those into modern darkwave. The first of the 3 is more post-punk heavy, while the second track, Dying Light, is a much heavier, almost dark industrial influenced track. And I found that one to be more interesting to my mind. It has touches of the 80s in the sort of clapping hands sound effects they use and the bright future retro synth melody. The vocals are enjoyable. The vocalist employs a great sort of tortured, deep melody that sounded more akin to synthpop artists like Colony 5 or Pride and Fall. And the third track incorporates even more of that synthpop sensibility, but still keeps its dark edge throughout. It reminded me a bit of old tracks from State of the Union, who are apparently still making music, and I didn't know that till I looked them up again. But it's an interesting twist on darkwave and post-punk, that kind of combination that we continue to see be popular. Alright, from Rome comes the new single, Heart of a Lover, by This Eternal Decay. And it's immediately catchy. The lyrics are clear, So even during the first listen, I was already singing along with the chorus. Musically, it reminds me a lot of the band Wolfsheim, or maybe even like a Beauty of Gemeine as well. There's a great romantic melodic guitar and a sort of alt-rock backbone to it. It's a style of goth music you don't hear much now. I feel like it fell out of style maybe for not being as extreme or as avant-garde or as poppy, but I find it really enjoyable. The single also comes with a version that's more of a heavy rock interpretation of the track, and then a haunting piano version that will make you pine for your lover, which is a version that I am partial to as a hopeless romantic. This band's other singles are different from this track as well, so there's a good chance you'll love something they've done in the past if you're into this. The next recommendation is a brand new band out of Germany called Attic Frost. This newest single has 2 tracks on it. It's, or would you call that an EP? I don't know. The first is largely a gothic rock track that leans towards the drama of darkwave. It's a catchy, repetitive track that's dark and brooding, and has some guitar riffs that remind me of Fields of the Nephilim almost. The vocals sound like they're being recited in a catacomb, and there's an overall occult vibe to it that I like. The second track is much moodier, with shades of The Cure in the guitars and Sisters of Mercy in the drums. It's the kind of track you'd play to break up with your partner. So both songs are from different parts of the spectrum, but they're both well done, and I'm really interested to see how the final album turns out. In a very similar vein is New Mexico's Slow Dance with the Dead. Their new single, Dark Ritual, is off the upcoming album, and it's exactly the kind of goth track that I would want to dance to in a smoke-filled, seedy club late at night. It's one of those lugubrious goth tracks that has this trance-like quality in its repetition. You kind of just want to stare at your winkle pickers and shuffle around in the dark. There's a creepy tinkling synth line, deep sonorous vocals, trance-inducing drum machine, and a She Passed Away-esque guitar tone. It's a great proper goth band track that you would put alongside a hit like Lebanon Hanover or someone similar. If you're looking for something shoegaze, the upcoming album From Sunshine's Cold out of Edinburgh would be what you need. I always talk about how I love atmospheric goth music, and shoegaze bands like this take that to the next level. You can't help but slip into a dreamlike state, floating around whatever space you're in as it all melts into a fuchsia and teal cloud unmoored from physical reality. There are 3 tracks currently available, and they're all drenched in reverb and cascading waves of melancholy. Heavy Heaven is the new single from Johnstonsons, and you could almost say it's a caffeinated version of the shoegaze tracks from the previous band. You get that dreamy 80s sensibility to the music with lush melodies and hazy drum machine, and a deep, powerful vocal. It's definitely an iteration on this band's previous albums, and those previous albums had a kind of misty quality to them that is missing here, but this is still one of my favorite singles this month for sure. And then we also have the new track by Denever out of Bulgaria, and that is called Estorbas, and it's got a sick ass beat, let me tell you. The percussion on this track is akin to modern post-punk acts, except spicier, and goddamn if the bass isn't funky. It's frenetic, dance-oriented post-punk with droning vocals and sparkly guitar. Memoriam is an artist out of Russia, and their new EP is titled something that I can't pronounce, but it's certainly worth checking out. There's 3 tracks on this EP, all less than 2 minutes, so there's absolutely no fat left to trim. It's a reserved and contemplative take on post-punk that blends familiar modern takes on guitar and synth melodies with a production sensibility that reminds me of goth rock from the early 2000s. Personally, I think the short length on these tracks actually detracts from the album because you don't really get time to sit with the music and get familiar with a track. But that's just my personal taste. The last track is my standout as there's an incorporation of a dark, almost oppressive sound. It gives me the feeling of being outside at dusk as dark black thunderclouds are rolling in. Danse's new album, Fishbowl, is the kind of unique new music I like to see in the scene. The artist lists no wave and industrial among the influences thrown into their post-punk cauldron. You certainly get the hard-hitting, almost classic EBM percussion at times. Melodic synth-pop riffs are included that have that pop up in surprising places. And while I'm not well versed in no wave, I can certainly hear influences like Teenage Jesus and The Jerks in the slower, more minimal tracks. They've got a track called Crash Landing that really reminds me of the more experimental tracks from Bauhaus, as there's a big dub and funk element. There's saxophone, lots of off-the-wall synth noises. It's a fantastic goddamn track, and you really don't hear anyone else doing that right now. But that just points to the complexity and diversity of the album. There's punk influence on some songs. Vocally, there's a Suzy Sue element, and there's traces of like Nick Cave as well. I mean, the vocal performance is just as varied and impressive as the instrumentation. And the instruments and the vocals elevate each other, which makes for an elevated album. Honestly, this entire Sinister Suggestion is full of incredible music. This might be my personal favorite, or at least very close with the Bellwether Syndicate album. Definitely a big recommendation from me. Finally, Vasm is a band from Detroit, and their newest album is titled V. I have to be honest, this album was kind of a slow burn for me. It reminds me a lot of the Christian death album Iron Mask, in that it's not a frenetic death rock album. The guitars and bass are a lower tone than you'd expect and have that kind of weighty feel to them that you'd get more from like a sludge or stoner metal album. And some tracks have more of a vibe of like The Weight to them. The production value also adds to that feel of an older goth album because it's on the lo-fi side. Like it sounds more like a studio session recorded to cassette than high quality, like modern production style. The vocals are great. There's a drone-like masculine vocal and a feminine vocal that is just fucking belting those lyrics out in a really impressive kind of gothic metal way. Certainly worth giving this album a listen. It's gotten a lot of praise from friends of mine. I think it is one of those that you have to just kind of sit with and listen to multiple times for it really to soak in. And that's it for my Sinister Suggestions. Unbelievably, there were still lots and lots of singles and EPs and albums that I could have recommended and just simply did not have the time for. So make sure you're out there looking for new music, right? Checking our Spotify playlist and listening to this episode is a great start. Head over to the Bandcamp page, follow those links, but definitely keep on the lookout for new music popping up, because there is a metric fuck ton of it right now. But with that, we're going to move on to the always deliciously dark All Goth Considered.
Greetings, you're listening to the May 2023 edition of All Goth Considered with Obscure Undead. I'm your host, Azy, and in this segment we explore 3 recent singles and releases and hear what the artists have to say about their art. So refill your wine glasses or teacups, and let's dive into these dark waters together. First up, Aux Animaux is the solo project of Stockholm, Sweden-based self-described haunt wave artist, I love it, Godza. Channeling 80s and 90s pared back, slow burn synth vibes that puts me in mind of Kraftwerk meets Switchblade Symphony on the edge of a finely honed electronic blade. Aux Animaux' latest single, Lost Souls, following the December 2022 release of their latest EP, Hauntology, on Phonophobic Records, is a beautifully composed piece that juxtaposes Godze's deceptively calm, reserved vocals against powerful animal rights lyrics and unsettling, really scream-reminiscent synth samples. But enough from me. Let's hear from Godze.
Hi y'all, this is Aux Animaux from Stockholm, Sweden. I do dark wave, cold wave, haunt wave-ish kind of music, and I just released a new single called Lost Souls. So Azy asked me to make a little introduction about what I do in the song, and I thought it could be cool to talk a little bit about how I made this song, to break down a little bit the process. So the song started with me recording the arpeggiator bass synths that you hear throughout the song. But initially I actually had recorded it with my old Korg synth, Micro Korg, that I just recorded this beat, and then I actually sold that synth. And while I was starting to make my new album, I found this little synth beat that I had recorded like 2 years ago before I sold my synth, and I started building the song from that. I did the drums and the pads and the theremin, and I played a song to my husband, who is the drummer of Then Comes Silence. So being a drummer, his first reaction was, something's wrong with the synth, it doesn't go with the beat. And those of you who work with synthesizers probably know arpeggiators can be a bit tricky to work with. If you miss a beat, everything gets sort of pushed forward in the wrong place. And since I had sold the synth, I didn't have the chance to re-record it. Tried a few different tricks and nothing worked, and it was very frustrating, and I couldn't really hear what Jonas heard because I'd been working with the song for too long, I couldn't hear what was wrong anymore. So at the end of the day, I tried some different synthesizers. I tried with Novation Base Station and my little Roland boutique synth. Nothing worked. So at the end of the day, I happened to re-record that section with Logic's own soft synth. That was how the song came to be. I was this close to giving up on the song, actually, but then all of a sudden everything fell into the right place. That's the story with the production part. And then there is the part with the lyrics. So I've been a vegan for over 10 years now, and I was vegetarian before that. And the reason I'm vegan for me is for the animals. I just think it's horrible how they have to live. They are born and raised to be tortured and murdered, and the little they live, they have to live in horrible conditions. And I wanted to make a song to make their voices heard. I had made a song before on my first EP. It's called The War. That was also about the same cause. Animal liberation, try to give them a voice. That was a while ago, and I thought it was time for me to make a new song, bring attention to the conditions the animals have to live in. The song is written from the perspective of the animal living in captivity in a cage, in a dark place, full of rage. I made the video for the song myself. I actually borrowed footage from animal liberation organization here in Sweden called Alliansen. They were kind enough to let me use their footage, and I really hope people will watch it because I think it's very important and we shouldn't close our eyes, because this is happening, this is every day, this is reality for these animals who have to live in these conditions. I hope one day everyone will be vegan, and I hope one day this kind of torture will stop. So if any of this sounds interesting at all, please check my music, my social media, follow me so you know when I release something new and if I'm coming your way on tour. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Azy and Obscura team, for having me. See you around.
From the inner coast of the Scandinavian peninsula to the outer, we're now visiting Trondheim, Norway, where solo artist and producer Carl Morten Dahl makes music under the moniker Antipole. You may know Antipole from their collaborations with UK Bay Peace Burns of Kill Shelter or Paris Alexander, or from numerous remixes that he's done from bands like She Passed Away to Nuremberg. And if you don't, I'm assuring you, you're in for a treat bag filled with post-punk wave, or goth wave as I've called it, goodies notable for driving guitars and catchy wave hooks. Antipole's latest single, Midnight Shadows, sees Carl collaborating with Paris Alexander again, and I could go on for way too long talking about how much I love Antipole, or, better yet, I can hand the spotlight over to Carl to tell you more about Midnight Shadows.
So hello, Azy and Cemetary Confessions. My name is Carl. My work with Paris Alexander is obviously different from my work with Kill Shelter. It sounds different than it should be. So I've been working with Paris Alexander for 6 years now, and this time we agreed to aim for a 50-50 equal creative input, and not like working on Antipole demos or sketches or ideas, but writing the songs with equal input. At least that's a goal, and that hopefully that could spawn interesting ideas. Not being in the same room or even in the same country, we had to add layer by layer, and then sending back and forth between us. So with this song, the Midnight Shadow song, the inspiration was some of it, at least, the sound of the dark sound of the dark wave act Trust from Canada. So I wanted to combine the nasty sounding synthesizers with the dreamy guitars fitted for the dance floor. So that was the idea. And that said, it was Paris Alexander that, based on those ideas, started recording the beats and the grim synths and a groovy bass line. So that worked really well and sounded amazing to me, and it was easy to build on that, creating the guitar melodies that worked on with his ideas, and the guitar melodies, they came pretty instinctively and naturally. So I sent that back to Paris Alexander, and he recorded the vocals in the end. We did some minor changes after that, but the song came to life in just a few days, so that was really rewarding and interesting. So I've been very fond of Trust for a while, and his work really inspires me. And other inspirations for the upcoming album have been the Norwegian Bel Canto and the French Asylum Party, and of course others. And then, of course, Paris Alexander has also got his inspirations, which is melted into the pot. So the whole album, working on it, has been a rewarding process, and I feel it's 50-50 equal input from me and Paris Alexander. So that was, I think it was really cool working on the album. Thank you.
Traveling back across the Atlantic to New York, we're catching up with the goth eclecticist Scott Harris, who writes music under the name Hororhaus and runs a New York goth event called Hororteria. Hororhaus has combined everything from death rock to harsh electro in a diverse array of serious creative expression, and recently released the single Gravitate in collaboration with Indiana-based solo synth artist Square Hollow. You may know Square Hollow as DJ Gomez from the genre-fluid promotion group Indie Gothic Society, in addition to his heady synth-based music. So, two rather eclectic DJs and musicians walk into a bar, and the punchline is a really compelling blend of their styles. Scott tells us more about the process.
Hey everyone, this is Scott Harris from Hororhaus, talking a bit about the process and inspiration behind the collaboration track with Gomez from Square Hollow called Gravitate. About 6 months ago, I was talking online with Nat from Dead Souls Gothic Lounge, and she suggested that I try a collaboration with her mate, DJ Gomez. And Gomez is a very talented programmer and songwriter. I've been a fan of his for quite some time. So Gomez sent me the backing track, and I immediately thought it was great and catchy. Dark, but kind of had a synth pop thing about it. So my role was to write a vocal melody, the lyrics, and perform the vocals. And something about the track brought to mind the early 80s, and I kind of thought that a dance floor story about a mutual attraction while on the dance floor in a club setting would be a cool angle to try. The lyrics are sort of a dark homage to Madonna's Into the Groove, but I feel that the lyrics could fit any club-like setting beyond that, and the lyrics dig deeper into the masks so many people wear and are afraid to shed in fear of truly being seen for who and what we are. And the lyrics are a metaphor and speak deeper to shed the fear of loss and love and just go for it. After I recorded the vocals and Gomez did some further editing, we decided I would mix and master the track. So this is my first writing collaboration as Hororhaus with anyone, and I think the track came out really good and really cool. I really enjoy listening to it back. And a further tidbit, I was going to make some further tweaks to the final mix, and my computer completely crashed and lost the mix I was working on, sadly. But it was a sign that we just needed to put it out as is. And there we have it.
Thank you for listening. For more, please follow me on most major social media platforms under the handle Obscura Undead. Especially check out my YouTube. Post mixes there. It's pretty awesome. All right, take care of yourselves. Love you. Bye-bye.
And there you have it. Our little experimentation with the format of the show. Before I thank everyone for their support, I just want to say that I would like to dedicate this episode to Sanctus Manium. For those of you who may not remember, Sanctus Manium was on 2 previous episodes. They were on the Goth Considered 6, and they had their own episode in December of 2021, which was called On the Fear of Death. And that ended up being kind of a therapy session for myself, but hopefully an episode that resonated with a lot of people and provided many helpful coping mechanisms when thinking about death and dying. Of the death and dying episodes we've done, that was my personal favorite because of the personal nature of it. And maybe I overshared a bit. I don't know. But Sanctus was instrumental in propelling me forward through the death anxiety I was experiencing and some mental health issues I was experiencing. Something that they were familiar with, intimately familiar with. And the reason this episode is dedicated to them is because last night I found out, as of this recording at least, I found out that they had died. I'm not going to get into a lot of personal details on the podcast, but I was incredibly fond of Misty and grateful to have had them in my life in some small way. I posted online that the phrase, "I'm so goth, I'm dead," came to mind. And I think that is something they would appreciate and find amusing in this situation. They were an advocate for death positivity and worked extensively with death as a death doula. But they were also a Star Wars fan and a lover and an artist, and single-handedly made clown goth a thing. They were a proponent for better healthcare, which is something which the healthcare system was something they were intimately familiar with, unfortunately, due to a lot of things that I don't necessarily need to get into. They advocated for sex positivity and were incredibly fond of rats. I had just talked to them a couple days before I found out they died about rats, and I'm not going to be able to share much more without being emotional. So I just would like to say, I just thought it was relevant to mention this as they were entangled with the podcast, and I likely would have had them on a future episode as well. They were so sweet and thoughtful and transgressive in a shocking way that I really appreciated. Something that helped me, something that came to mind that I had talked about a couple days prior, but I think is relevant to this situation, is the Buddhist parable, I guess you would call it, about how the glass is already broken. So I will just read this here briefly. You see this goblet? For me, this glass is already broken. I enjoy it. I drink out of it. It holds my water admirably. sometimes even reflecting the sun in beautiful patterns. If I should tap it, it has a lovely ring to it. But when I put this glass on the shelf and the wind knocks it over, or my elbow brushes it off the table and it falls to the ground and shatters, I say, of course. When I understand that the glass is already broken, every moment with it is precious. So for me, death is the most common experience everyone has, right? We talked about this on the show a lot, and you just kind of expect that is what makes life precious in many ways. And that is what people do. That is what organisms do, is we die. Glasses break. But hopefully that's a reminder to really strive to stay in the moment and appreciate the gift that the moment is. And tell your friends that you love them before they're dead. Don't wait, So with that, I don't have any good segue out of that, but I do want to thank our Patreon members who enable us to produce this podcast, without whom this content would not exist. And honestly, I'm just appreciative of the fact that you are listening. You, right now, that are listening to this podcast, and that you find some value in it. Sometimes I listen back to episodes and I just think I don't understand why. I understand in my head what I would like to produce and provide and the kind of community I would like to cultivate. But sometimes I'm like, I don't understand why people connect with this, but I'm so grateful that you do, and that this is meaningful in some way to the point that you've incorporated it into your life. And that's the greatest compliment I could ever receive. So thank you for listening. We will be back next month with many wonderful guests. So until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of the Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.